The first thing Tessa Boone did on her first day as personal assistant to Lucian Varro was knock his espresso directly into his lap. Not spill, not tip, knock, full send. The cup left the saucer, did a half rotation in the air, and deposited every drop of dark roast onto the front of what she would later learn was a $4,000 suit. The second thing she did was try to fix it with a paper towel she grabbed off the sideboard, which meant she was now dabbing at the crotch of the most dangerous man in the northeastern United States, while two of his bodyguards watched from the doorway with expressions she could only describe as spiritually destroyed. "I am so sorry," she said. "I am so. This is coming out. This absolutely comes out. Espresso comes out." I looked it up once, or maybe that was red wine. It might have been red wine. Lucian Varro looked down at her hand, which had stopped moving, which meant she was just holding the paper towel there now, frozen, her brain having finally caught up with the situation. He said nothing. She took a very slow step backward. "I'll get more paper towels," she said. "Castellano." He said the name quietly, and one of the men in the doorway, the shorter one, built like a refrigerator that had learned to wear a tie, walked over and handed him a handkerchief. Lucian took it without looking up. "Who hired her?" "Mr. Reeves, sir, from the agency Wit Prestige Staffing." She came with references. Lucian finally looked at Tessa. He had dark eyes, the kind that didn't give anything away, and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who took their work very seriously. He was somewhere in his early 40s or maybe late 30s. It was hard to tell with men like him, men whose faces had been arranged into permanent authority. "What are your references from?" he said. Tessa straightened up. She was not a small woman. She knew she was not a small woman. She'd been not a small woman her entire life, which meant she'd developed a kind of practiced confidence in rooms where people expected her to disappear. "I worked at reception at a law firm for 3 years. Before that, I was executive assistant to the regional manager of a paper distribution company in Trenton. It was very fast-paced." "Want?" One of the bodyguards made a sound she couldn't identify. It might have been a cough. It might have been the beginning of a laugh that he was actively fighting to suppress. Lucian stood up from his desk. He was taller than she'd expected, which was saying something because she'd expected tall, and walked to the window that looked out over lower Manhattan. Outside, November was doing what November did, which was make everything gray and vaguely threatening. "You have until Friday," he said. Tessa blinked. "To do what? To prove you're worth keeping." She should have quit. Every reasonable part of her brain, which she acknowledged was not always the dominant part, said quit. Walk out, go back to the temp agency, and take the receptionist job at the orthodontist's office that doesn't pay as well, but also doesn't involve organized crime. Because she knew, obviously. Everyone in that building knew. Lucian Varro didn't run a real estate holding company, not really. The real estate holding company, was what the real estate holding company said it was on paper, which is to say it was paper. She stayed because she needed the money. Her mother's apartment lease was up in January, and the landlord had already hinted he was raising the rent, and Tessa had exactly one marketable skill, which was being extremely organized in a world that was extremely not. So second day, she managed not to spill anything. This was largely because she avoided carrying liquids, which she considered a tactical victory. What she did do was walk into a glass door. Fully, forehead first. The glass was floor to ceiling and completely clean, and it didn't move when she hit it, which meant she bounced, which meant she staggered backward directly into Castellano, who caught her by both arms with the resignation of a man who had seen things far worse than this and was simply adding it to the list. "The door," she said. "Yes," he said. There's no handle. It's motion activated, Miss Boone. You have to stand in front of the sensor." From somewhere behind her, she heard what she was almost entirely certain was Lucian Varro making a sound that was not a laugh, because Lucian Varro did not laugh. It was just a sound, an involuntary sound. Probably he had something in his throat. She stood in front of the sensor. The door opened. She walked through with great dignity. The third day, a man came to the office who made both bodyguards stand up straighter, which Tessa had not previously thought possible. He was thick-necked and red-faced, and he sat across from Lucian's desk, with his hands on his knees like he owned the room, which she got the sense he was trying very hard to make everyone believe. His name was Orin Stahl. She knew this because she had made his coffee, successfully with both hands on the cup at all times, slow, careful steps all the way from the kitchen. And she'd heard Castellano say it under his breath like a warning when she'd passed him in the hall. She set the coffee down in front of Stahl. The Meridian situation, Stahl was saying. You're stalling. I'm considering, Lucian said. Considering is another word for stalling when someone with more resources than you is waiting. Lucian smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that came before something unpleasant, and Tessa recognized it the way you recognize weather. She turned to leave and caught the edge of her heel on the corner of the desk, which sent her lurching sideways, which sent her hand out for balance, which sent it landing directly on the stack of documents on the side table, which cascaded onto the floor in a sprawling mess of what she immediately recognized were financial records, photographs, and what appeared to be a hand-drawn organizational chart with names she absolutely was not supposed to see. Everyone in the room went very still. Tessa crouched down and started gathering papers. Sorry, I've got it. She stacked them neatly, face down, in the order they'd fallen, which she hoped communicated I am not reading these, even though she had, accidentally, read 3 of them. She stood up, set the stack back on the table, straightened it, and walked out. In the hallway, she pressed herself against the wall and breathed. Castellano appeared next to her. How many names did you see? None, she said immediately. He looked at her for a long moment. None, she said again. I was looking at the floor. I am very focused on floors. Safety issue. He nodded once, slowly, and she had the distinct sense that he had decided to believe her, not because it was plausible, but because it was easier for everyone involved. Stahl left an hour later. She watched him go from the kitchen window, watched him get into a black car that had been idling on the street. Something about the way he moved bothered her. She had grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to read people quickly, where the guy who smiled too wide was always the one you watched. And Stahl had been smiling too wide since he sat down. She was still thinking about it when Lucian appeared in the kitchen doorway. She startled badly, which sent her elbow into the cabinet handle, which sent a cascade of pain up her arm that she absorbed through sheer force of will and a very tightly closed mouth. You're still here, he said. It's 4:15. I'm here until 5. He looked at her, that flat, measuring look she was getting used to, and said, Most people are nervous around Stahl. I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, she said. I've been nervous around scarier. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. What did you notice? She turned to face him fully. About anything. She thought about whether this was a test, and then she thought about the organizational chart, and then she decided that honesty had kept her alive this long, and she was going to keep trusting it. He kept looking at the window, she said, the one that faces the east side of the building, and he shifted the conversation topic twice right before you were going to answer. He's not impatient, he's redirecting. The kitchen was quiet. Go home, Miss Boone, Lucian said. You're here until Monday. She picked up her bag. At the door she stopped. You should get the windows on the east side checked, she said. Just in case. She left before he could respond, because she was fairly certain her heart was beating loud enough to hear. Monday came. She was there. She'd spent the weekend in a state of low-grade anxiety, reorganizing her mother's kitchen cabinets and researching whether you could ethically quit a job via text message. She had decided you could not. She had also decided she was not going to quit. She hadn't fully interrogated why. The east windows had been checked. Castellano told her this sideways, without making eye contact, while she was making the morning coffee. "Clean," he said. "Oh," she said, "mostly." She nodded like she understood what that meant and carried the coffee very carefully into the office. The thing about working for a man like Lucian Varro was that the job itself was not what she'd expected. She'd expected tension, danger, the constant low hum of threat. And that was there. It was always there, background noise she'd learned to read the frequency of. But the actual work was what surprised her. He was meticulous. His files were organized. His schedule was precise. His correspondence was handled with a level of formality that reminded her of the law firm, except the stakes were considerably higher. He also worked very long hours. She started staying until 6, then 7, because there was always something else to do, and she was, if nothing else, good at doing things. On a Wednesday in early December, she brought him his evening coffee. She'd gotten much better at the coffee situation. She now held the cup with both hands and walked at what she privately called museum pace, slow and even, and found him standing at the window again. "My father built this company from nothing," he said, without turning around. She set the coffee down. She wasn't sure if he was talking to her. Sometimes men like him talk to the room. He meant the real estate. He actually meant it. He paused. "By the time I was 20, he was in over his head, and the people he'd borrowed from had different ideas about repayment." Tessa sat down in the chair across from his desk. She didn't ask. She'd learned that the right response to this kind of talking was to simply be present and not fill the space. "I didn't want this," he said. "But you're good at it," she said. He turned then. "That's a strange thing to say. Is it? People are good at things they didn't choose all the time. Doesn't mean they wanted it." She wrapped both hands around her own coffee. She'd started having one when she worked late, an accommodation no one had officially approved, but no one had rescinded either. "My mum's good at stretching $30 of groceries to feed 4 people. She didn't want to have to be." He watched her for a moment. "You're not afraid of me." "I am, a little," she said honestly. "But I was more afraid of not being able to pay her rent, so here I am." Something in his face did a thing she couldn't quite name. Not softening exactly. More like rearranging. "Good night, Miss Boone," he said. "Good night, Mr. Varro." She would think later that things shifted after that night, though she couldn't point to a specific moment. It was more like a gradual change in pressure, the way you don't notice the weather turning until suddenly you need a coat. He started asking for her opinions. Not on major things, not at first, but on small logistical puzzles, scheduling conflicts, the occasional letter he was drafting that needed to sound less like a threat even when it was one. She had a gift for that, it turned out, making things sound civil. Castellano, who she'd initially categorized as permanent skeptic, started saying good morning to her first, instead of waiting for her to say it to him. The other man on Lucian's security detail, a quiet, lanky man named Fitch, who she'd barely noticed for the first 3 weeks, brought her a sandwich one afternoon because he'd noticed she skipped lunch when she was busy. She almost cried about the sandwich, which she kept to herself, and Stahl came back. He didn't announce himself this time. He arrived on a Thursday morning with 2 men she hadn't seen before, and the atmosphere in the office changed in the way of a room when a window breaks. Sudden, sharp, impossible to miss. Tessa was at her desk in the outer office. She heard him before she saw him, heard the quality of the silence that preceded him, and she looked up in time to see him push through the door with the particular confidence of someone who had decided he didn't need to be let in. "He's in a call," she said. Stahl looked at her like she'd materialized from thin air. "Get out of the way." "He's in a call," she said again. She had her phone in her hand. Under the desk, she had already hit the 2-button shortcut she'd set up on day 1, which sent a silent alert to Castellano. "If you'd like to wait, I can let him know you're here when he's free. I said, I heard what you said. She stood up. She was, as she had been her entire life, not a small woman, and she'd learned that there were moments when this worked in your favor if you were willing to use it. She planted herself squarely in the space between Stahl and the inner office door. And I'm telling you, he's in a call. You're welcome to take a seat. The two men with Stahl looked at each other. She got the impression this didn't happen to him often. The door to the inner office opened and Castellano stepped out from somewhere. She'd never quite figured out where he materialized from when he was needed. She suspected a side door she hadn't located yet, and stood next to her. Mr. Stahl, Castellano said pleasantly. Mr. Varro will see you in 20 minutes. There's coffee if you'd like to wait. Stahl looked at Tessa. She looked back with the expression she'd perfected over years of dealing with the worst the service industry had to offer. Pleasant, absolute, immovable. He sat down. She sat down too. Her hands were not shaking. She was very deliberate about this. The meeting that followed lasted 45 minutes, during which Tessa reorganized the filing cabinet, answered 3 emails, and did not listen at the door even though she wanted to very badly. When Stahl left, his 2 men trailing behind him, she noticed he didn't look at her. Men like that, she'd found, only ignored you when you'd unsettled them. Lucian came to her desk 20 minutes later. You held him, he said. I told him you were in a call. I was not in a call. He didn't know that. He looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in it she didn't quite know what to do with. Did he threaten you? Not specifically, she said. He was more in the implied threat zone. I've dealt with implied threats. There was a regular at the diner I worked at in 2019 who implied threats every Tuesday for 8 months. What happened to him? He moved to Phoenix, she said. So I won. Lucian made a sound. She was almost certain now that it was a laugh. A very small, very contained, quickly suppressed laugh, but a laugh. I need you to understand, he said. That Stahl is not. A Tuesday regular at a diner, yes, I have gathered that. She looked up at him. But the thing that's actually useful is that he thinks I don't matter. People who think I don't matter consistently underestimate me. I'm fine with that. It's worked for me before. Something in his expression did the rearranging thing again. More pronounced this time. Go home, Miss Boone, he said. You've done enough for today. She should have gone home. She got as far as the lobby, realized she'd left her phone charger on her desk, came back up, and walked into a situation she had approximately 0 training for. The 2 men who'd been with Stahl were in the outer office. Not Stahl, just his men. One of them had Fitch on the ground, which was not a sentence she'd ever expected to construct. The other one was heading for the inner office door. What Tessa did in the next 4 seconds was not the product of training or courage or any kind of rational calculation. It was pure reflexive chaos, which had always been her default mode in crisis. She picked up the marble paperweight from her desk. It was very heavy. She'd moved it approximately 11 times in the past weeks and had thoughts about it every time. And she threw it at the man heading for the door. Her aim, as with most things physical in her life, was imperfect. She'd been aiming for his shoulder. She hit him in the back of the knee. He went down with a sound like a tree falling. The other man let go of Fitch, turned, and stared at her. I played softball for 2 years, she said. I was not good at softball. She held up the stapler from her desk. But I have thrown a lot of things at a lot of targets, and eventually something lands. He took a step toward her. The inner office door opened and Lucian came through it, and whatever he saw in the room made him very still in a way that was somehow more frightening than movement. He's okay, she said, pointing at Fitch, who was sitting up. That one's got a knee problem now. She pointed at the man on the floor. That one, she pointed at the man who'd been moving toward her, I'm still working on. Lucian looked at her for a long moment. You threw the paperweight, he said. It was the heaviest thing I could reach, at his knee. I was aiming for his shoulder. Another one of those sounds. Definitely a laugh afterward. After Castellano had arrived and the men had been removed from the premises in a manner she decided not to ask about. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea because her hands had finally started shaking, and she needed something to do with them. Lucian sat across from her. This was new. He didn't usually sit in the kitchen. "I'm going to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to decide right now whether you want to know it." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I probably already know most of it. Probably. And I'm still here." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was doing its city things, indifferent and continuous. "Stahl has been trying to take over my operation for the better part of 2 years. Tonight was escalation. Okay. It's going to get more complicated before it gets less complicated. Okay. That's all you have to say?" "I mean, I have other things to say." She looked at her tea. "I have feelings about it. I'm going to process those feelings in my own time, probably on Sunday while I reorganize something. But right now I'm asking if you're going to handle it." "Yes." "Then okay," she said. "That's what I'm saying." He looked at her like she was something he hadn't encountered before, in a life that had probably encountered most things. "You should go home," he said. "You keep saying that. You keep not going." She stood up, pulled her coat on, picked up her bag. At the door she stopped, because she'd noticed she had a habit of stopping at doors, and she thought it had something to do with the feeling of not quite being ready to leave the room she was in. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think your father would probably think you're handling a situation you didn't ask for about as well as anyone could." She didn't wait to see his face. She went home. The following weeks were what she would later describe to absolutely no one, because she didn't discuss this with anyone as eventful. Stahl made 2 more moves, both of which were indirect. Lucian's response to both was quiet and efficient in a way she understood even without knowing the specifics. She noticed things at the edges. Conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, coded phone calls she wasn't supposed to understand, Castellano's expression shifting from neutral to something more watchful. She kept working. She reorganized the document system, digitized 3 years of paper files, and redesigned the schedule in a way that added 45 minutes to Lucian's day by eliminating redundant travel time. He noticed. He didn't say anything directly, but she found a grocery gift card on her desk one morning with no note, which she was 90% certain was his version of a thank you. She got her mother's rent covered. She didn't think about that too much, because thinking about it made her throat do things. On a Friday afternoon in January, she was the last one in the office except for Lucian, which had become their usual arrangement by mutual unspoken agreement. When he appeared in the doorway and stood there in the way he had of filling a frame completely. "I want to tell you something," he said. "You've told me things before. It's been fine. This is different." She saved her document. She turned her chair. "Okay." He looked like a man running internal calculations that weren't coming out even, which was an expression she found unexpectedly endearing on a person who ran calculations on everything else in the world with perfect precision. "I don't," he started, stopped. "You're the only person in this building who talks to me like I'm a person." She considered this. "You are a person. That's not the general consensus in most rooms I walk into." "Well," she said, "most people in most rooms are working with incomplete information." He crossed the office and sat down in the chair across from her desk, which was the first time he'd sat in that chair, which had previously been occupied only by people waiting to speak with him. The role reversal was strange, and she felt it somewhere in her chest. "My mother used to say that the right person had a way of making even bad situations feel survivable," he said. She was quiet. "I have been in a large number of bad situations," he said, "over the past several months. They have been more survivable because of the filing system. Not entirely because of the filing system." She looked at her hands. Her ring finger had a callus from the way she held a pen. She thought about Camden and her mother's kitchen and the temp agency on Broad Street where a tired woman named Pat had handed her this placement and said it pays well but it's unusual, which had turned out to be the understatement of the decade. "I should tell you that I'm not." She stopped. Started again. "I'm not what most people in your position would. I know what you are," Lucian said. He said it with the same flat certainty he used when discussing balance sheets and territory lines, and somehow that was more convincing than if he'd dressed it up. "I have been watching you handle things for 4 months. I know exactly what you are." She looked up at him. "Someone who throws paperweights in the wrong direction and still solves the problem," he said. She laughed. Actually laughed out loud, which surprised her because she hadn't expected to. "The knee was functional," she said. "He couldn't chase me if his knee didn't work." "It was efficient," he agreed. "Thank you. I was not complimenting you. I know. That's why it was a compliment." He looked at her for a long moment with that expression she'd slowly learned to read, the one that meant he was being honest in the only way he knew how, which was carefully and without ornamentation. "I'd like you to stay," he said. "Not just here. Not just as the person who handles the filing and the calls and the situations where someone needs to be told they can't go through a door." He paused. "I mean here." "You mean here?" she said. Yes. She thought about it. She thought about all the reasons it was impractical and inadvisable and against every piece of common sense she'd accumulated in 26 years. She thought about Stahl and the men on the floor of the outer office and the organizational chart she'd accidentally seen and pretended not to see. She thought about her mother's rent. She thought about the sandwich Fitch had brought her. She thought about the grocery gift card with no note. She thought about the way the room felt when he sat across from her desk. "Okay," she said. "Okay. You keep expecting me to give you more than okay. I don't have more than okay right now. I'll have more later. Right now, okay is what's available." Something moved in his face, finally, fully, the thing she'd been watching arrange and rearrange itself for months, and it landed somewhere she recognized. "Okay," he said. "That's enough." Outside, January was doing what January did, which was make everything cold and clear and sharp-edged with the particular honesty of a month that had stopped pretending. Tessa Boone sat in her chair in the outer office of a man who ran things she was only beginning to understand, in a building that hummed with the particular energy of power held carefully, and she thought that Camden, New Jersey had prepared her for stranger things than this. She saved her document. She made 2 more notes in the schedule. She did not knock anything over on the way out. It was, all things considered, a very good day.